I don't think you need me to tell you that 2024 has been a great year for gaming. Heavy hitters like Metaphor, ReFantazio, Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, Stalker 2, and Astrobot are complemented by viral indie games like Balatro or Mouthwashing, which is a great game. You should definitely go check out Mouthwashing. But that's all to say the gamers are feasting this year, and the Game Awards show just how crowded this year's releases were. And that's not even to mention some of the multiplayer games that released this year like Marvel Rivals or Supervive, which are games that might not even be on your radar. And you have to mention massive flops like Concord, Skull and Bones, or even Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which, yeah, you remember that one? It was released this year. There are way too many to keep track of, but there is one game that has stuck with me through this year, and as we close out the year, I can't help but get that shit out of here. I'm not even remotely prepared to talk about Helldivers 2 yet, but I might make a video about it one day. For now though, I want to talk about a little game that was released early in 2024. A game that took me by surprise. I want to show you a game and talk about a game that takes you on a road trip at the end of the world. So there was this moment in Stalker 2 that surprised me on my first playthrough. It happened a short time after I arrived in Zalicia, the first town, and discovered that I had the option to sit around a fire with the other stalkers and just exist. For a moment, at least, the horrifying monsters and bandits of the zone didn't seem to matter that much. I could sit and watch the moon filter through the clouds and the leaves float past me in the radioactive wind, and for a moment, I felt the oppressive nature of that grotesque and confusing world melt away. I felt even a little bit cozy, which I did not expect from a Stalker game. Now, cozy is a word that has come to define a lot of games, and some argue it's a genre in itself. There are even whole creators' careers that are built off of covering cozy games. It touches some genres more than others, but we're not far off, at least in my mind, from some new version of Rule 34 that proclaims if a game exists, there's probably a cozy version of it. Even while researching my latest video covering The Long Dark, I came across lots of people describing the game as cozy, or saying that it at least gave them feelings of coziness. After some reflection, I agree that sitting by the fire waiting for your food to cook or water to boil while the dull, howling wind shakes the shelter you're in is cozy feeling. And here it was, a cozy moment nestled in between brutal gunfights, radiation poisoning, and just overall horrible, horrible things. That spot isn't the only place you can do that throughout the zone. There's lots of other ones where you can sit down, even pick up a guitar and play a little bit of a song. I'll be honest, I'm not sure why the developers put it in here, and maybe it was something from the other Stalker games that I'm just missing because I haven't played them all. Maybe, just maybe, it was to add a little bit of coziness to the world. I'm gonna keep thinking that at the very least. But it got me thinking about what other kinds of cozy games or cozy adjacent games that I might play. I wanted to kind of take a look at that moment I had in Stalker 2 and The Long Dark, and I came to realize that their depictions of coziness are sort of grafted onto these gritty and harrowing experiences. These two seemingly different worlds touch briefly for a moment, blending to become this sublime new experience. That's what I wanted to explore in this video, and how games can use coziness and familiarity to help us find comfort in the face of the world coming apart at the seams. So spoilers ahead for Pacific Drive and Season A Letter to the Future. If you haven't played either of them yet and you're sensitive to the spoilers, but they look interesting to you, wait for a sale, go pick them up. And you know what? I'm not spoiling a whole ton, but if you're sensitive to spoilers, it might be a tough watch for you. Just a heads up. In 1947, deep in Washington's Olympic Peninsula, Dr. Ophelia Turner and her team, her husband Alan, and scientists Tobias Barlow and Francis Cook were working on a revolutionary new project called LIM technology. It was backed by the US government. LIM was supposed to change the world. Instead, it triggered bizarre and unexplainable events. People disappeared, strange phenomena surfaced, and the region spiraled out of control. By 1955, the government stepped in, forming a secret agency called the U.S. Advanced Resonance Development Agency, or ARDA, to study what became known as anomalies. ARDA created the Olympic Exclusion Zone, a hidden area containing all of that chaos. But it didn't stop there. Over the years, the anomalies spread, forcing the zone to expand again and again, until by 1987, nearly the entire peninsula was off limits. ARDA disbanded, and the zone was sealed, and the whole thing was buried from public knowledge. Jump ahead to 1998. This is where you come in. You're just a regular person called the driver, heading to the zone's edge for your own reasons that are not very clear right from the start. But before you even get close, something strange happens. A detour through the woods turns into a nightmare when a blinding light appears, destroying your van and leaving you stranded in the zone's outskirts. You find an old station wagon that somehow still works, but there's something off about it. It feels alive. Way more alive than a car should. Through its radio, you connect with Tobias and Francis, who explains the truth. The car is a remnant, an object infected by an anomaly, and it's bonded with you, feeding off your mind, and it won't stop until it drives you insane. Your only hope lies with Dr. Ophelia, who also goes by Oppie. I see what you did there, Ironwood, very clever. Reluctant but willing to help, she teams up with Tobias and Francis to help you figure out how to free you from the remnant and help you escape from the zone. But as you dig deeper into the zone's secrets, it becomes clear that Lim and the choices made decades ago left scars that are far deeper than even they could have imagined. Now that's the setup for Ironwood Studios' Pacific Drive. It's giving kind of Stalker if the US government was involved, and the ensuing 40-ish hours will see you careening through the zone trying to escape. And the funny thing is, the only way out is to go deeper. So on its face, Pacific Drive is a first-person survival game with a customizable car. It has all the trappings of a survival game, complete with tools, inventory management, and crafting. Veterans of the genre will feel right at home with these mechanics. And while you're out in the zone, you can break into houses, gas stations, and field research outposts to get more materials for crafting. So you can get better equipment to get deeper into the zone, to get more materials, and well, you know this all. If you know any sort of crafting game that has progression, it's basically this. Just like any other survival game, there's a component of scavenging and upgrading your tools that feels almost too familiar in some ways. There are strange anomalies that are terrifying when you first encounter them, and they will shock you, burn you, and rip parts of your car off. So we have enemies, check. Crafting, check. Scavenging, check. All of this adds up to a fairly standard survival crafting experience, at least that's what it felt like to me when I first started playing. But that's when Pacific Drive takes that formula and just blows the whole thing up. See, Pacific Drive isn't set in an open world. It's made up of smaller interconnected areas that you string together in a run, or I guess you could even call it like a road trip if you're like a masochist like me. Each time you leave the garage, you select a destination, which is the only way to return. And if you play it on the regular difficulty, there is no quitting mid-run. You have to make it all the way to your destination or you lose all of your collected materials. If this sounds familiar to you, it's probably because it's just kind of an extraction game like Escape from Tarkov or like Hunt Showdown. Weirdly, the devs have cited those games as being like an influence for it. Maybe that's why I like it so much, because I do love those games, even though I'm really bad at them. I'm not going to get into too much detail on extraction shooters, or this video will be like 3 hours long, but to keep it simple, this is essentially a survival roguelike. Each section of the zone gets progressively more dangerous the closer you get to the center, so the outer zone doesn't pose much of a threat and is reasonably safe, and you're able to get the basic materials. But as you progress through Pacific Drive's extensive upgrade trees, you'll need materials that are located deeper in the zone. That's where the Remnant comes in. Much of this game is dedicated to kitting out your car. There are more upgrades for this thing than your player character, which I think is a really refreshing take on the really tired mechanics of survival games. You can change every door, every panel, every light, the interior decoration, and the exterior. You can put on side racks and roof racks and attach floodlights. You can put on extra gas tanks and a lightning rod. The customization is endless, seriously. These choices help you overcome some of the zone's more challenging areas. If you go to any community of Pacific Drive players, you'll see the breadth of customization there is to the Remnant. This is where some of the cozy aspects of this game start to show. The Remnant is the only familiar thing out there in the zone, and a lot of the time, just seeing it parked there while I was scavenging was enough to turn this from being a trip through a radioactive, blasted hell to a fairly peaceful drive through a Washington forest. It's hard to explain, but sitting down in the car felt like I was getting back into my first car, a 94 Chevy 1500. Man, maybe I'm just like getting old, but the way the door thunked closed or how the engine hitches for a second when you start it all contribute to this feeling of nostalgia that also hits those cozy notes for me. It's a little bit subjective, but it's kind of what I'm going on. If you're like me, you'll begin to feel connected to this thing and you'll wince every time you slam into a tree or spin out into a ditch or an abductor flings you across the map. You will also spend a lot of time physically building your car. All those components that I mentioned earlier, they have to be like bolted onto it, and each piece is individually modeled, so you have to carry around the component before you install them. And if you're like me, you'll also create a pile of garbage parts in your garage because you just never know when you might need them. That plays into this next part that I think really contributes to the coziness. That's the garage. Before we get to that though, I'll share a typical run structure with you. You start in your garage, hopefully your car is fully fueled, charged, and mostly repaired. You then select your next trip. I need anomalous limb energy, which you can think of as just XP for upgrades. So I'll go to this point on the map with a bunch of it. I also need chemicals, so I add that to my shopping list. The time of day is an important factor. I have mostly come to grips with, it's not something you can really plan around. You just have to go. Unless you want to sit in the garage and wait for time to pass, it's not really viable. So anyways, I decide I'm going anyways, whether it's going to be dark or light out. The weather looks good and the anomalies don't look too dangerous, so I get in and I head out. The first stop is pretty uneventful. I loot some buildings and find the chemicals I'm looking for, so step 1 is complete. The next goal for me is to find some of these things. They're called anchors and will become important at the end of the run, so I make sure to grab all the ones in the area and move on. Stop number 2 is a bit more dangerous. The area is perpetually dark, and there are more electrical anomalies and acid anomalies, which can do all sorts of bad stuff to your car, so I need to be a bit more cautious. And there are abductors. You don't want to mess with them. So I stay quiet and cautious, and I loot some more stuff, and I find a few more anchors, and even an unstable one, so that's good. This has been a good run so far. So really, once all of that's done, and I've gotten to the last area, you know what, maybe I'll just play it for you. I think it's a little more interesting to see it in motion than to have me describe it. But every run, every single trip that you go on ends like this. And just like that, you're back at the garage, safe and sound, surviving another trip out into the zone. That rising tension throughout the run, building to a crescendo cannonball race to the portal while the world literally collapses around you, followed by that sweet release of returning to the garage. That is the best part of this game in my mind. I think it really just makes it all come together and become like really cohesive. As you pull in, the familiar sight of the garage is one of those sublime moments where the cozy and the chaos meet to make something really special. There's comfort in returning to the garage after braving the zone, scraping so close to death and the unknown, only to return to the mundane tasks of gassing up your car, replacing the headlights, or just enjoying a quiet moment watching the rain falling outside. The garage is the only safe spot in the game, where your resources aren't being slowly sapped away, and that creates this feeling of a secure bubble in that unknowable terror of the zone. It's like a cozy cabin to regroup in before heading back out to the zone. The garage is a fascinating aspect of the game that, while not being as deep as I might have liked, creates a great contrast to the grinding gameplay that often can feel unforgiving and obtuse. What makes the idea of a cozy apocalypse compelling to me is this contrast of nostalgia, comfort, and familiarity with the grotesque, horrifying, or unknown. Pacific Drive does this really well. So well that it doesn't even feel like it's doing it. You know, it's subtle, it's scary, and the garage makes it all come together in my mind. There's another thing that this game doesn't really do that I think another game does really well that sort of exemplifies the idea of a cozy apocalypse. What happens when the unknown and apocalyptic is hidden behind a veil of a beautiful pastoral world? What does a game that has an apocalypse bubbling right below the surface of a cozy world tell us? What does a game that has an apocalypse brewing right below the surface of a cozy world tell us about us, our relationships, and ourselves? Well, that's a good question, me. And I think a game that answers that Now, Season A Letter to the Future was not released in 2024, but I'm still going to talk about it because I make the rules and you're watching this. You are a captive audience right now and you have to listen to me. I wanted to bring it up because it's almost the exact opposite of Pacific Drive. On the outside, it's a chill bike ride through a beautiful valley where the main mechanics are taking pictures, recording sounds, and building a journal of your travels. But below that cute pastoral veneer, I love that word, pastoral, beneath that is a grim truth to your journey. Everything you see, hear, and touch will be destroyed, swallowed by forces beyond your control. And in some ways, that truth is much more oppressive than anything in the Olympic exclusion zone. Every note you read or flower you stop to take a picture of will be gone in hours. While it was haunting, I couldn't help but feel cozy, though, while cycling through Season's beautiful landscapes. But before we get into that idea of the scary and the cozy, the horrifying and the not so horrifying, we need to talk about what Season is and what it's not. On its face, Season is a semi-open world exploration game. You play as Estelle, a young woman tasked with documenting the changing of the season after your friend has a premonition that it will end soon due to a coming cataclysm. What is a season? Well, we'd call it an era or an epoch, I guess. There's nothing really like it. Maybe like medieval or Renaissance period is the closest thing I can think of. In Estelle's world, seasons mean something a little bit different. There's been a few of them before her time: the season of modernity, the golden season, and the season that she was born into, a season that doesn't have a name yet. Each of these had some sort of change associated with them, such as industrialization, cultural exchange, and war. Estelle comes from a remote village in the mountains that she, or no one else from it, has left in years. Your friend Pate had a dream that the season will end soon, and it's decided that someone must go to record and document what the world is right now as it comes to a close. You're armed with a camera and a cassette recorder and told to document the world and take what you record to the museum vault, which is, they call it a palace of art and memory at the edge of the world. You never see it, so it's kind of abstract. In the game, they say it's the only place to be safe from the turmoil of a changing season. My friend Bat, he pointed out when I posted that I'd finished this game into our Discord that it's basically about being a journalist, and I thought that was funny because I'd never even gone down that line of thinking. You kind of are a journalist, though. You document things and you enter it into, I guess, the record of knowledge. That's what journalists do, and that's my day job. So to me, I guess it didn't really seem like anything different, and that's why I didn't even make the connection. But, shout out to Bat for making that connection. It is very cool, and it is very much what Season is going for. In fact, Season is obsessed with recording things, and it's obsessed with memory. The first scene of the game has you constructing a protective pendant out of objects that hold significant memories, culminating in your mother losing the memory of you leaving. It's a bit much to have thrown at you, I'll admit, but Season wears its fantasy inspirations on its sleeve. There's a lot of things that are just like, oh, it's magic. And that's okay, because it never strives to be something super realistic. You use a Polaroid camera, and then you have a magic necklace that protects your mind. You kind of gotta suspend your disbelief a little bit. That obsession with memory is one of the core themes that Season has woven throughout its gameplay. Estelle and the player relate to the world almost entirely by documenting what you see and hear. The framing device comes in the form of a person reading Estelle's journal in what you can assume is the future. It is the first thing that you see. Somebody comes into a room, sits down, and starts reading the journal, and you can hear Estelle's voice. So it's kind of interesting, that Estelle made it to the vault. So The stakes are fairly low in that way. Some of the other fantasy elements were a bit much for me to get through. You construct that pendant and your mom introduces this idea of mind sickness. People are afflicted with in Estelle's world. They're diseases that make them unable to forget, or it's weird because there are some that you can't forget, some that you can't remember. It's a little weird, and if you take the time, there are lots of documents in the game that tell you what these sicknesses are. They're not that important, but they kind of make you interrogate the idea of remembering and what your memories become over time. Estelle's village was founded by a doctor who was trying to cure the diseases, so they don't take center stage in the plot. They pose interesting questions about why we try to hold on to memories or what happens when we can't remember them. Throughout the game, you encounter people in various stages of remembering, sometimes deciding what memories to hold on to or which ones to leave behind. They aren't all sick, some of them are just dealing with significant life stuff that's happened to them. A loved one that's passed away, a career that hasn't panned out the way they hoped, or a life that seemingly has no purpose. It's hinted that there is a debate on whether the sicknesses are even real, but you see how it's impacted the lives of people who sought out cures. So, I bring it up because it has to do with this idea that Season is obsessed with memory and what it's like to lose your memory. So each location you visit in Season has a journal section where you place your photos, recordings, and thoughts. The player has complete control over how each of those pages looks too. Mine will look different from yours, which will look different from another player's. It's a very unique mechanic, and I hope developer Scavenger Studio builds on it in their next game. Deliberately laying out your memories and arranging them in a way that makes sense to you is such a strange feeling to have in a game. Now, player expression exists everywhere. How you construct your base in Minecraft, which gods you pay tribute to in your run in Hades, and the list goes on. Each of those choices carries its own weight in those games. In Season, the choice of what to capture or leave out takes on a different weight. How do you choose what to keep and what to leave behind to be lost to the changing of the season? What I fill Estelle's journal with might be the only thing that has recorded what it's like to live in the now of this season, and I chose to fill my journal with pictures of landscapes and the sounds of nature. Is it wrong to leave out the people I met along the way? Who's to say? This might not sound as dubious of a moral choice from the outside. These people and places are not real, of course. But we live in a time when we will have to start making some of these choices. I mean, in the real world, we may have to start making these choices. Some places are literally falling into the ocean due to climate change, and in this game, this digital world, I was confronted with that question. What would I choose to show the future? In some ways, that's what we do every day online. We document our lives in an undying archive that maybe one day will be indexed and saved for some future person to sift through. I do not envy that person, but it might happen. You never know. On to what actually happens in Season. Your journey through the world brings you to Tiang Valley, which was a tourist destination in days past. You roll up to the entrance of the valley only to find it abandoned, except for a man dressed in a military-style uniform who tells you that the valley is closed and will soon be flooded. You learn that almost everyone has been evacuated and that the old dam, one so old that no one knows how to fix it anymore, will be blown up by an organization called the Grey Hands. The Grey Hands are the closest thing that Season has to an antagonist, but it's not so black and white. They are a self-described community organization that does everything from health clinics, minesweeping, daycares, and weddings. Their name was meant to express neutrality, but you learn that they're going through a rebrand of sorts. After talking with the man, he decides to let Estelle into the valley because he believes that Tiang Valley is worth documenting. He says that he'll be back to pick up the last of the evacuees at midnight. As you ride down the winding road into the valley, you see the beauty of the landscape, and an unsettling realization comes over you. At least it came over me. The realization is that by the end of the day, it's all going to be gone, wiped away by the flood. This is where Season opens up and gives you some choices on where to explore. I don't want to give too much away here because Scavenger Studio clearly put a lot of work into each area of the valley, and it's so densely packed with objects to be photographed and sounds to record that it can take up to 8 hours to finish the game if you want to see everything, and it took me about 6 hours. I know I missed some stuff, so there's lots to look for and lots to enjoy, so it is just good to, cycle around and explore. I'm going to talk about one area though. And it's a great example of how the game infuses its grim reality with a hopefulness that I think lends itself a comforting and maybe even cozy feeling to what is essentially an apocalypse for the people who live in the valley. After passing through an evacuation center set up by the Grey Hands, you'll come across an abandoned farmhouse and a field filled with cows. You can explore the farm and learn a bit more about the lives of the people who live there. There's a tractor and a sign for ice cream. Clearly the owners of the farm sold it to tourists. There's a sewing studio where they made embroidered tapestries. You'll find each cow grazing quietly, each with its own name tag. You'll find a shrine dedicated to the cows and their trophies. There's a granary that Estelle says is filled with grain that is no longer needed. Then you find a note from the farmer who says goodbye to his cows and says the only thing that he can do is leave the radio turned on to their favorite station. That was a gut punch for me. That growing sense of sadness as I picked through the remains of some person's life was suddenly personified by the farmer's heartfelt note to the animals they loved. Each cow looks up to you as you interact with each one, and you know that come midnight they will be gone. It's very dark. They're unable to escape the coming flood, and they can't even begin to comprehend it, which is just so sad to me. I had to stop a minute here and appreciate the gravity of this game. The unending pull that this human-made disaster has on every living thing in the valley. It was staggering, and I applaud Scavenger Studio for capturing this feeling so well. Just in one area, all of the areas have something like this, and they did a great job of varying that up, because it's not all just like sad, on its face, like the cows. The cows are very sad. That story is sad, but it's not all that straightforward. And on top of all of that, it's all through environmental storytelling. It's great. It really is. This is a masterclass of that. That tinge of dread for the coming flood permeates everything in Season, A Letter to the Future. Like I said earlier, it's oppressive, and if you get sad easily like me, it can feel like a lot, especially given the job you're there to do. Every picture I took and every burbling creek I recorded felt like a stone being put in my bag, getting heavier as I explored the valley. The cruelest trick that the game plays on you is it only gives you 2 pages to fill in your journal for each area. So even though you can take an infinite amount of pictures, you can only save what fits on 2 pages. Now, maybe I'm over-exaggerating here, but it created a spiraling sense of fear in me. It brought me back to the moral question of what do you preserve? You can't even say you're saving anything. All you can do is record and transfer it to a page, a soulless imitation of the beautiful world that you're existing in. So to kind of wrap it all together, and now that I've dumped all of that on you, I think we can finally talk about what stops this from becoming a dreadful slog. I think a few things the game does stop this from happening. One is the mechanics. I've talked those to death already, but I think the process of traveling to a location, walking around to find stuff to take photos of, and listening for things to record is meditative. You're given so much creative control over what you capture and what it looks like, and while you have no control over the flood or the changing of the season, you do have complete control over what the person reading your journal in the future sees. There's no actual gameplay element of that. The person in the cutscene reading Estelle's journal doesn't look up at you and say, wow, that was a nice picture of that cow, but I don't think it needs to be that direct. That feeling still exists, even without it being right in your face. I found a quiet comfort in that. Even though the cows are gone, RIP cows, they live on in your photos and tapes. The feeling of the farmer's love for the cows lives on in the scrap of paper you collected. It's a story that wouldn't have been told or remembered if you hadn't traveled here and explored the farm, and I think this is what makes the game feel cozy. It teaches you to live in the moment and really take in your surroundings. The game does struggle under some of the weight of the premise, though. It is a game after all. It's just a collection of code and pixels, and if I miss the cows, I can restart my save and see them again. But no matter how hard I try, I wouldn't be able to take the same picture or record the exact same sound on another playthrough. There's something magical to that impermanence. The entire game felt to me like a road trip that I'll remember forever. Now for the real hard-hitting analysis. That feeling of a road trip, I think, is what links these two very, very different games together. They both have radically different ways to convey a similar feeling of comfort at the end of the world. Both games give the player control over a blank slate and let you put your own mark on it. Your connection to the car in Pacific Drive is like the journal in Season. They're both the one thing that stays with you throughout the game, changing as you do. Both games give you control over a small slice of the world to create a sense of comfort and maybe not in the typical cozy game sense, but they have an air of nostalgia about them that feels like a warm embrace of a lost childhood memory. The zone in Pacific Drive doesn't hold memories for the player, but it does for Oppie and the other characters you meet, and they all remember the zone before it became what it looked like today. They each have a connection to the zone that lives on through them, and in that way, Pacific Drive could be seen as a glimpse into what it might be like to visit Tiang Valley after the flood. What might the changed landscape look like? What might have survived? What might that farm look like? Will nature have reclaimed it? These are all questions I've asked myself in the weeks since finishing Season, A Letter to the Future. Climate anxiety is a growing phenomenon that describes the fear, anger, and powerlessness and uncertainty surrounding the future of our planet. It's something that is being studied right now and seems to affect younger generations disproportionately. Researchers debate about it, but most agree, unsurprisingly, that it's not pathological and a totally normal and appropriate thing to feel. I think that both of these games have something to teach us about the current climate disaster we live in. Season shows us that sometimes our only job is to bear witness to what is happening to our world and make sure that those living in the future know what it's like to live now, and hopefully that will help someone down the road maybe not make those same mistakes. And Pacific Drive shows us that the seemingly mundane things in our lives can give us a reason to keep going even as the world falls apart beside us.
We begin in our mother's arms. We open our eyes, but she's not there. We breathe in. Where is she? She is everywhere. And we breathe out. Good morning. Welcome. Congratulations. You have just stepped into a new season. You may feel as if you're seeing the world for the first time. You may have noticed that colors are more vibrant. You may have noticed that food tastes better. What you are feeling right now is how it feels to be liberated from the past. There once was a season that was beautiful, but everyone you met, their eyes were clouded, and their necks were turned backwards. They were weighed down by loss, haunted by the nightmares of another era. Now you may feel as if a great weight has been lifted. In certain cases, you may feel an unexpendable well of energy rising up inside you, because you know there is so much to do, that the world is ours, and it can be anything we want. With your help, we're going to do it right this time. You won't be alone. There will always be a hand and a voice beside you. There will always be a song to sing.
Tear down the ruin in your mind, the wound you kept inside, can you let it go? Share now the season in your eyes, the people that you find will forget what's yours and mine in the world to come. Tear down the ruin in your mind, the wound you've kept inside, can you let it go? Share now the season in your eyes, the people that you find will forget what's yours and mine in the world to come.
Whew, okay, that got a little bit out there, but I think it was the only way I could talk about these two games that greatly impacted me this year. I could have just probably done a 45-minute video on Pacific Drive itself, but I wanted to leave a lot of the details out of it for people who are interested in playing it. I might have hamstrung myself by focusing on these two games, but I wanted to end the year on a hopeful note. might have gotten a bit out there for game analysis, but I really felt compelled to talk about the link between these two games and how they kind of both link to climate change in a way that's maybe there. I don't know. I just, couldn't help but think about it while I played these two games. To be honest, with all that's happened in 2024, I was losing faith in humanity like most people do. I'm not special in that way. I still don't have much, but if I wish anything for this video, it's that it finds the people who need a little reminder that there is still hope in the world, and to give you a nice warm hug as we hurtle into the new year and whatever the hell it has in store for us. So thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw here, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel, and it tells me that I am doing what people want to watch. And if you don't like it, well, dislike it and move on. It's how the world works. So thanks for watching. Stay safe as we head into this changing season. And most importantly, happy holidays. We'll see you in the new year.